Clips. In George Square. Let me find the dude's name. Right,
this is going to be quite annoying to me, Kip, because the amount of times I've walked past these things, been totally oblivious to it all.
Right, well, this is the thing, mate. Like, here we go. Like, you've got Colin Campbell, right, who ended up being first Baron Clyde. I've heard him also called Baron Clydesdale of Scotland, right? He was a field marshal. Now, he was part of the British military, so he's honoured for his service and he's got a statue. He was born in 1792 and died in 1863. But then you go and look at his military campaign, right? And this is where I get... And this guy was from Glasgow, where all the merchants were at the time. And look at the timeline compared to what was happening with the French Revolution and the American Revolution, all in very close proximity. Now, this guy first turned up on the scene in 1823, and he done the honourable thing that honoured him, the great. And I don't mean to offend anybody, by the way, and I hope I'm not doing this. I'm just looking at it.
Just dealing in fact, Kip.
Right, so apparently he quelled a slave rebellion in Dean. It was a rebellion by 10,000 slaves. I believe them to be sugar. The majority of them to be sugar.
Pesky slaves.
And it was like a crown colony of Guyana, I think it's called now. And he went over there and killed about 200 to 300 slaves before they would go back to being slaves, I suppose. Now, Glasgow made its money on sugar and tobacco. Now, the reason Glasgow made its money is in the Western Empire at the time. No, the Western Empire, Britain, who was the biggest empire at the time, they had a 2 weeks advantage on the way of trade winds to the Americas. So people who wanted to get their stuff 2 weeks earlier came to Glasgow. There were 2 weeks in front of everybody. That's where Glasgow made all its money for. Now, this Colin Campbell, first Baron Clyde, the next time he turned up was in 1942, Kev. And guess what he was doing? He's doing opium wars.
Oh.
Right? Now, who was involved in the Opium Wars? It was the Royals and the East Indian Company and all those trading companies who could be argued were not argued, they were the first corporate fascists. They were corporations that owned countries. It was corporate fascism. A lot of people don't know that, man. It exists. This is what I argue still exists to this day, mate, and I can talk you through how it all comes through George Square. So anyway...
Mate, I'm sitting here fascinated. Keep going, man.
Right, so... the first Opium War he done, right? What's the next one? Now, in he quelled an Indian rebellion, right? Now, at the time, there was Indian soldiers who were under the command, who fell under the command of Britain, but were working for the East India Company, sorry. If anybody wants to go and research a wee bit about them, go and research them. Corporate fascism.
They were absolutely massive at the time, were they not?
Aye, mate, aye. So, they dealt in opium. So, in 1942, he's in the Opium War. In 1957, he's turning up and quelling a mutiny against the East India Company. Now, this guy isn't serving king and country. He isn't protecting Britain. He's out there corporate interests. He quelled slaves for sugar owners, for sugar plantation owners in 1823.
Basically a gangster kit.
He then bounced into the Opium Wars to control the drug trade for let's say it was either the Royals or the East India Company. And then
I think you were probably right the first time, Kip. Let's just say it what it was. It would probably be the Royals.
So I would argue, even though this guy would come under the stature of working for the British Army, he was a mercenary, man. He's turning up and just fighting wars for all the corporations at the time. And I don't think it's a far-fetched leap of the imagination. So that's one dude that turns up in George Square.
Nothing new under the sun right enough, Kip, is there? It's always been before. It's crazy, man.
Well, and I started to say, right, George Square, laid out in 1781. It was named after King George III. Now, I don't know if you know King George III, Kev, you probably know a wee bit about him through the American Revolution.
Not too much, to be honest, Kip. Like I say, man, you're my history guy. I'm just here to steer the ship, Kip.
he was the dude that was in charge of Britain during the American Revolution. He was in charge of the 13 colonies, I believe it was, right? Now, let me think. He was also Prince of the Holy Roman Empire, right? Now, you just need to go and look into what a Prince of the Holy Roman Empire is, right? So, as I always say, all roads lead to Rome. At this time, there was...
So, come on, you can't leave us hanging like that, man. What's a Prince of the Roman Empire?
Well, it was more or less, like, it wasn't like a hidden title or anything. It was an open title that people inherited. I believe this, right? I didn't research this thoroughly. I believe they inherited it, and it was more or less sitting on a council which allowed them to vote and stuff in and around the Holy Roman Empire.
Like you wanted the club, obviously.
Aye, so he was part of the gang in that sense. He was also, if you go in, he was George William Frederick blah blah Hanover. So this is the dude, your social... What's the one you know?
Sasha... Coburg. Saxa Gotha Coburg.
Right, so see if I told you there was a statue with that name on it in George Square, mate, would you be surprised?
Absolutely astonished.
Right, now don't quote me on that because I've not looked into it yet. I've only just briefly seen it, so I need to go and look into that. I've not went over that yet, but...
You're forcing me to want to go out in the rain tonight, Kip, and I'm not happy about this.
Oh, well, mate, you can probably see it for Google Earth, man.
Well, this is true. Google, they might be a spying agency, but they have their uses, man.
Right, Jesus. So I was talking about King George right now. See the big phallic symbol in the middle?
Yeah.
It was originally meant to... the idea was originally to put King George up there. Right? Believe it or not.
I don't think that would have gone down too well.
That's exactly why it didn't happen, mate. The merchants were hated. The merchants weren't too happy with him because they mucked up their business between the Americas, and the people of Glasgow so on didn't like him because it mucked up their wealth. Now, do bear in mind, this dude was listen to this one for a cracker as well to put it in perspective how much was going on around this time in history. Now, the King George III, who George Square itself was named after, was King of Britain at the time of the Battle of Waterloo. Now, people who don't know what happened in the Battle of Waterloo, and what I'm saying here is you can bring in the Masons and the Knights Templar, but what you have here is the war between the corporations and the aristocracy and the monarchy. Not so much the aristocracy, because it could easily be bought and paid for.
Is that not also the battle that Rothschild made an absolute killing on?
Kev, that's the exact one. That's why I'm putting it into the time frame, man. So
sorry, man. Sorry.
No. You batter in with everything.
I might steal some of your thunder, mate.
Mate, don't batter in, man.
Well, we're just about to go out to a break, Kip, right? So we're going to leave it at Waterloo there. Waterloo. We'll ask the chat room to remind us when we come back, because you know what us pair are like. But, Kip, from me personally, that what you've gone through so far, I mean, I live in Glasgow. I'm literally 15 minutes walk from the place you're talking about. And this is kind of news to me, man. And
mate, I've not even talked about the city chambers and the 6 Satans on one side and 6 on the other. You need to remind me to talk about that, man, because I could sit and talk about rabbit.
Also, to all the listeners, head over to Kip's Clips. That's Freedom News Hub 2.0, because I believe he's been putting out a few videos this week along these very topics. And I know, like myself, there's a lot of people out there in woo-woo conspiracy land that just love symbology. And what you've got to take from that is that it means something to these people. It is their marker, it is important, and it's really, really interesting. So join us straight after the break, where Kip will get right back into breaking down George Square and Glasgow's Masonic roots. Okay, listeners, welcome back to this week's edition of GUNN, Glasgow Underground News Network. With this being the festive season, I've come up with a crafty wee idea to spread some info. When you're writing out your Christmas card list, I've done this for a few years now. Maybe it's a crap idea, I don't know, but it's certainly caused a few conversations. What I do is I write them out as normal, blah-de-blah, have a good year, all the rest of it. But yet, on the other flip side of it, I'll write Infowars.com, or this year it'll be truthfrequencyradio.com. And it's just a novel little way to maybe awaken those around us. And
Kev, you should be writing Kip's clips, mate. That's out of order.
That'll definitely be on it this year as well, Kip. And while I'm on that subject, why don't you head over to Facebook straight after the show and spread the word about truthfrequencyradio.com. There's a whole host of great shows on here with some great information. You've got a young lassie that's on just before us, Crystal Kids Radio. I believe she's 13 or 14 years old. She does an absolutely wonderful job. You've got the aforementioned Joe Joseph. You've got...
I was listening to it. Mate, I was listening to a wee bit of that before the show, man. It was brilliant.
Sometimes I listen to the tail end of it, and I would love to listen to all of it, Kit, but with work commitments, the slavery calls, stuff like that. But yeah, remember to share the word about truthfrequencyradio.com, because without you guys, it's nothing. And we need to grow the numbers, and by growing the numbers, that in itself will open people's minds, and will grow the numbers that we need possibly to change things around before it gets too late. Although, in my opinion, sometimes when you look at the news, the New World Order's already here. All we can do is just figure out a way of living around it. So before the break, we were going into, Kip was going into the history of George Square, the monuments, stuff like that. I believe he's going to talk to us about the city chambers and the symbology surrounding that building. I, for one, when I first woke up, I used to look at the likes of Washington street layouts, things like that, the Masonic symbols that you see there. And like I was saying with Kip during the show in the previous segment, you look around any kind of street layout for these cities, especially capital cities, and it's there for all to see. It's the calling card of the Masons and the power, basically the power elite leaving their mark on these centres of commerce. And Kip?
Kev, I'll tell you the very easy signs to look out for in any Masonic.
Good man, because you can see I was struggling to get my thoughts across there as usual, man.
No, that's all right, man. Like any Masonic square, there's obviously look at George Square, Times Square. Go and look at these squares and see if you can see these features. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. Now look at Washington DC, the White House. You have the dome on the White House. The dome represents the feminine, the bosom, the womb, the fish. The fish is an ancient representation of the feminine, and it's used quite a lot in biblical terms. And
there's a lot of fish symbology with the old Vatican as well, Kip, with the old mitre hat, the fish head hat.
Very true, man. And
sorry, mate.
So in Washington DC, that's where it was. Washington DC, you've got the dome, which is the feminine. And then right across the front of it, you have the phallic symbol, the obelisk in that case in Washington DC. Now, if you look at your standard Masonic symbol, you have the compass and set square. Ultimately, I believe it's meant to represent the male, the female, the duality, and sometimes you'll get the G in the middle. Now, a lot of people think it represents God, and what's the other one? Geometry, and also the grand architect. But I believe, and what I think the Masons believe, is when they're setting up their city layouts, they have the male and the female situated in front of each other, and it's meant to create a third entity, and that's meant to be like power and so on and so forth. Now,
Kip, see, before you move on from Washington, it's just a mad fact that always comes to my mind when we're talking about the Washington Monument. Above ground, it's 555 feet, okay? And it's rumoured, just rumoured, that below ground, it's 111 feet. Now, you do a simple mathematical...
Kip's Clip!